Okay, guys, so let's start. So this is our PortaiNerd, as you know, a 10-part webinar series on where we demonstrate several how-tos. The idea today is to talk about transitioning from Docker or Docker Swarm to Kubernetes with Portainer. And we have a special guest, Fabian Peter. He's one of our ambassadors. I'll introduce you to him soon. In this episode, as I just mentioned, we'll learn how to use Portainer as a tool, a container management tool for Docker Swarm and Kubernetes. But also, we will see that by the end of this episode, you're going to understand how to manage multiple endpoints, how to deploy Kubernetes using Docker Compose, and how to migrate from Docker to Kubernetes. And so we're going to try to. And in this panel, we have myself as a tech evangelist for Portainer. Here you can take note of my contact information. At the last line is my calendar. So if you would like to also schedule a meeting with me at some other point during these days, please feel free to access my calendar here directly on HubSpot and schedule a time for us to chat. I would love to chat with any of you here whenever you deem convenient. Right. And we have Michael Cooper, our product engineer from Portainer. His contact info here. Michael, as always, is going to help us with the Q&A. He's just one of those guys, one of those gurus that is very humble, but he doesn't know how much he knows about Portainer. He knows much more than he thinks he does. So he'll definitely be able to answer all your questions. And again, Michael, thank you for joining us. And if you want to request a demo, please feel free. You can access our demo site here. If you want to be technical here and talk about our initiative of how to migrate from Docker to Kubernetes. And we have a special guest, as I was mentioning, Fabian Peter. Fabian is one of our ambassadors, and he has had in the past year, tons of experience in how to do this type of migration, right? What are the challenges? And so I invited him for him to give us more of his experience to us, how Portainer managed to help him in his path of migrating from Docker to Kubernetes. But you know what? I'm talking too much. Let's leave the word for Fabian to let us know a bit more about himself and about his experience before I go into the demo.
Okay,
Fabian, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, hi, I'm Fabian. I'm from Germany. I've seen someone of the attendees also from Germany. So hallo und willkommen. As you mentioned already, I have a nice rap sheet in doing stuff with containers. I'm in this business for 12 years now, and lately also, of course, with Docker, Kubernetes, and all of the goodies of the cloud native landscape. So I'm running 2 agencies in Germany dealing with cloud native software development. So containers and Kubernetes are our daily doing, and exactly these migrations we will see today. We have done a lot of times in the past. I hopefully can bring a little value to this session, as Portainer does for me. That's what I want to take up front. Portainer helps a lot by that because it works really seamlessly between Docker and Kubernetes, same interface. So these migrations were a lot easier for us, for the engineers we're working with, because they had a common interface they could share between both systems. So I hope to see a lot of that today.
Yes, that's the plan. And Fabian, just tell us a little bit about your challenges. I mean, what are the main challenges that you faced and still face? Well, we know that it's not straightforward. I mean, obviously, Portainer comes in as a tool that helps and eases the process considerably, but it's never like there's no such thing as a magical tool that'll do things like with 2-3 clicks, right? I mean, how has that been for you in that sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the main challenge for us when working with teams that are migrating towards containers or towards more complex scenarios like Kubernetes, where you have lots of containers and lots of nodes, it's typically the design patterns that are hard to understand when you're coming from old world IT, where a web server and manual load balancing and stuff like that was a thing. Then you're having different paradigms. This world is new technology, things work differently. Stuff that was magic 10 years ago is like table stakes today.
Absolutely,
And
right.
Yeah, and that's actually our main challenge: getting the technology onboarded to people's brains, have them understand what are the benefits, reduce all the risks. Because yeah, one thing everyone has on his plate is anxiety, security, and will it do what I want it to, and will I understand it in the end? And yeah, I think tools like Portainer come in very handy at that point, because they provide a nice layer of abstraction to all the complexity beneath, and they have a beautiful visual interface for people to understand what's actually happening. And yeah, I'm not sure. I'm in this IT thingy for a long time now, so I've seen many forms of containers, virtualization, distributed systems. And one thing I've learned is it's not actually getting easier, at least not if you're dealing with the systems and building the abstractions, but it's definitely getting easier for end users to do more complex things. And yeah, Portainer is a beautiful middleman in this play, because it abstracts away, yeah, not only abstracts away lots of the complexity towards how containers are orchestrated and how they work inherently, but it also offers a lot of functionality that the containers themselves don't offer, like authorization and yeah, better understanding of namespaces and RBAC and stuff like that. All those things are not solved by containers per se. And since it belongs into this ecosystem, because teams typically need to secure their stuff and teams typically need to have an interface to control it, it's yeah, it's just one of the best tools you can put in. It solves many problems in that space, especially for engineers that are not into infrastructure like me, because I love fiddling with things. I guess most of the engineers that want to write software, they want to write software and not fiddle around with infrastructure.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's where this tool comes in super duper handy, and one of the bigger challenges. Yeah, abstraction, understanding, and transporting technology.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great definition. Really, the idea behind Portainers too, we always say reduce complexity and take away, the common and repetitive tasks that, currently are so hard to implement and to use in the orchestration, let's say, space, right? Because some of the tools that even lack certain features, like Kubernetes does not have a native RBAC engine that you can use to easily deploy, a governance policy in your environment. So
Exactly.
this is where we come in with a very. I really enjoy the RBAC. In my last PortaiNerd, we showed team collaboration solely based on RBAC, and that was quite interesting. So for those who want to learn a bit more about RBAC, I would like to also invite you to see our previous series and episode, sorry, in the series, and you'll see a lot of that functionality also in place. So without further ado, I'm sure the crowd is here anxious to see a bit of the demos, and I just want to also say this is not anything that I worked with Fabian. This is totally independent of mine. I'm very new to this. Fabian has a lot more experience than I have, but we didn't set up anything. This is entirely Delorenzo crazily trying to do this type of stuff. And Fabian, if you see anything wrong that you might also want to contribute, or anything that you think is I could improve in my method, please feel free to jump in and give your amazing knowledge and insights here, please. So I'm going to share my screen. So here I have 3 endpoints. These endpoints are 2 Kubernetes endpoints and a Docker endpoint. And the first Kubernetes endpoint and the Docker endpoint are local. They're running on my local network. And the DO Kubernetes is running on DigitalOcean, right? So the idea here is to show a process. First, I'm going to deploy a stack on Docker. And from then, I'm going to try to replicate this deployment on my local Kubernetes environment. And then finally, I'm going to try to do the same thing using DigitalOcean. So I'm going to start with very simple stacks, nothing too complex, and show the challenges I encountered during this process, right? The idea behind this is that if you want to do this, you might want to set up something similar where you have obviously your Docker environment where you have all your stuff running, but you don't want to go straight into production, right? And I could say in this case, production would be my DigitalOcean instance. You definitely want to have an intermediate instance, and that can be a local node or a local cluster that you can use for testing purposes. to make sure that your Docker Compose deployment will work, and then you can go into production. Right? This is how I would usually suggest people to do it. There could be an additional phase usually that is used as a lot in development, which is the quality phase. So you would have the development, and then testing, and then quality assurance, and finally you would go to production. Usually there are those four phases. So if you want to have an extra quality assurance endpoint here to make sure that the quality of what you're deploying is okay, it's just a matter of these are, let's say, methodologies that are common practice in IT, especially when it comes to development. This is nothing pertaining or to do with Kubernetes or Docker per se. It's just a way to you have a secure environment, excuse me, and method to deploy things. So let's stop the yap and let's go straight into my Docker endpoint and do a deployment of a stack, right? And I have a little in my GitHub, some YAML files. These are all Docker Compose YAML files. Let's start with, let's see, guestbook. I like guestbook. Let me get the original. So the ones that don't have the -org are ones that I played around with. So I'm not going to use those. I'm going to use the original ones that I downloaded from a website. I don't remember the name of the website. I played around so much with this, but when I remember, I'll post it here. So let's call the stack guestbook. And I'm not going to use the web editor or upload it. I'm going to go straight into my Docker repository and connect my Docker GitHub repo to Portainer. And I'll show you why I'm doing this in one of the deployments. You would want to put the repository reference. A lot of them in the past used to use as the main branch, the master branch. GitHub uses main. So make sure you reference the heads, or better said, the branch head to main, if it's in main. If you have other branches here, if you add additional branches, you want to make sure you point to the right branch. And on the root of this branch, you want to point to the YAML file. You could add environment variables here that I will show soon how that can be done. So yeah, I have everything to deploy my guestbook application in using my Docker endpoint. Let's deploy the stack. Because I've done this several times, the images are already running on my Docker endpoint. So I did my Docker, my container process didn't have to pull the image; it was already there. So yeah, as you see, it was very fast in terms of deploying it. And it's here up and running. I have my Portainer agent running, and I have my front end running. Okay, if I click on this, it's just a demo application that you can use as a guestbook if you may, right? You can always you can also use it as a chat engine if you want. So, but it's just like to show a little demo of an application running. And it's interesting because the stack has a front end and two Redis engines, a master and a slave engine running under it. So it's really a stack of several things running. I think this is Apache. Let's go into the guestbook front end and see what technology is running in it. If I'm not mistaken, it's Apache. Let's go to logs. Yeah, it's Apache too. So it's an Apache web server that probably has PHP behind it. There you go. It's got PHP, and it's got a form where you can, just type in a message and it'll get registered on the page. And the database behind it is Redis. Okay, it worked. Nice, beautiful. Let's try this on my local Kubernetes environment then before going to the main production environment. So the best practice is always, in terms of Kubernetes, to set up a separate namespace for any deployment. Please make sure you do this. Don't use the default namespace. The default namespace is sacred. Don't deploy applications on the default namespace. The reason why is that the default namespace cannot have any type of constraint in terms of RAM or CPU. And if you mistakenly deploy an application that goes rogue and starts eating all your resources in your cluster, you're going to compromise your Kubernetes environment. So make sure you have a separate namespace. And it's also easier to manage your applications under separate namespaces. So I created one called the guestbook. I'm going to go into applications. and I'm going to do an advanced deployment of this application. And as you can see, the first thing I'm going to select is the namespace I created called guestbook. The deployment type is going to be a compose, Docker compose format. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to point to my GitHub repository. Now now I'm going to allude to something that Fabian just mentioned in terms of Portainer. The interface is practically the same. Okay. I mean, it's as easy as just replicating the same thing I did for Docker, I'm doing here with Kubernetes. So copy the name of the file, paste it here. It's slightly different, obviously, because we're using a slightly different method. It could have been a Kubernetes native manifest format, but again, I'm migrating from Docker. So I selected the Docker compose format, and I'm pulling this from a Git repository. I click on deploy. And as the case of my Docker endpoint, the images are already stored on my Kubernetes endpoint. So it was very fast in terms of it didn't have to pull those images. It's just deploying those images. Let me see how this is going. And look how, it's already running. And look how interesting. It pulled a label that is in this Docker compose that is telling you the way I want this application to be published. And I really wanted this to be published as a load balancer mode, right? So I have a load balancer engine running on my Kubernetes environment that assigned a different IP. It's a private IP, obviously, but a different IP, so I can run this front end in a specific IP isolated from the proper Kubernetes server. And it's interesting to have load balancer if you want to have several applications that share the same port, so you don't have conflicts in terms of having multiple applications using the same port under the same IP, which is a bit of a nightmare, right? So I like to use load balancer for that reason. Now let's click on access here. Let's see if our guestbook loads. And it's as easy as going click and seeing that it runs identical to the one on Docker. You see Docker has a IP 51.160, and on Kubernetes I have a 55.10.10. It's a different IP, same application. I'm going to put another, how are you? Another message here. And it's like, wow, it worked. And then let's say, okay, so it worked on Docker, it worked on my local Kubernetes. Let's see if this works now on my cloud, a production environment. Now I'm going to my DigitalOcean endpoint, same thing. And you might say, well, if it worked on your local Kubernetes environment, why wouldn't it work on your cloud Kubernetes environment? Because not all Kubernetes are the same, okay? They should follow the same API and the same process, but not necessarily so. So it's always good to, as I said, have a quality assurance staging moment where you can make sure that you're doing things accordingly and that they will work accordingly. So I'm going to create a names, again, the same namespace. Sorry, God, I'm typing at the same time. It never works. Guestbook. Another namespace. This is my DigitalOcean Kubernetes environment. I created a namespace called guestbook. I'm going to go under applications, advanced deployment, select that namespace, guestbook, select compose, same thing as I did before. Copy my repository URL, refs, adds, main, and the name of the file that is here, right? If all goes well, it should work. And deploy. It's slightly slower, it's not as fast. In this case, I had the images also deployed here. I ran a test before, so it should, in terms of pull the images, it wasn't necessary. It didn't need to pull the images. It's just deploying the images, and they're almost running. Let's see now. We just make sure that Redis and Redis slave get started. Also, okay, Redis master is already running. You see, it's slightly slower because we're running in a cloud environment. But I think it's almost ready to run because slave is just the backup database for the Redis master. And the load balancer is still pending. Again, it's a cloud environment. So DigitalOcean is still pending in terms of providing me this IP. It should take some time. Let's see. Okay. It will work. I know it will work because I've tested this before. It's just a matter of waiting for the IP address to be provisioned by the cloud provider. Let's see, I'm actually going to do the font, and then I'll log into my DigitalOcean dashboard to see this process happening. I'm going to networking, and okay, so it's probably there. This is the IP address. Let's see if it's already reflected here. It takes some time to sync. Let me just copy this from here and see if this works. Because there you go. We have the same guestbook running now on the cloud. And I'm going to put it very well. Thank you. Okay, so we have a guestbook running here on my local Docker. Here. This is my local Docker machine. This is my local Kubernetes engine. And this is my guestbook running on the cloud. Very nice, very simple. It looks like everything should work as easily as this. But now let's start talking about, and now I see Fabian smirking and smiling like, yeah, right, Adolfo. What are you're selling what? Snake oil now? But it's not necessarily the case. I have obviously to be truthful. Portainer, in this case, helped me to keep a consistent interface in terms of using the necessary migration tools, but not everything is a bed of flowers. Now let's start talking about more complex, or probably not as, oh, here's the IP. Okay, finally got me the IP on the Portainer interface, right? Now let's try something slightly more complex, or I want to make sure to deploy something that's not gonna work straight away. Let's start with a stack called voting. If I'm not mistaken, this guy doesn't work out of the box. Oh, by the way, it's just a matter of opening the file. Yeah, this won't work out of the box, and I'll soon show you why. Okay, this is my repository. Refs, that's main, and the name of the file is Docker voting. On Docker, it should work because it's actually being deployed using the native Docker Compose engine. And there it is. This is normal, guys. This is just a temporary database that the voting engine sets up, but the interface should be here up and running. Okay. Cats and dogs. It's just like a demo of a voting system. Looks a lot like Kahoot. I don't know if you played with Kahoot, but it looks a lot like, it reminds me of Kahoot somehow. Okay, let's see. It worked on Docker, obviously. It should work. Let's try this on my local Kubernetes environment. Will this work on my local Kubernetes environment? So let's go to the same logic of best practice. I'm going to set up a namespace. Now I'm going to deploy this stack. It's an advanced deployment, compose, paste the repository, refs, that's a, and the name of the file is Docker voting. Now drums are rolling. Will it work? Oh, look at that. I almost made the mistake and the sin of not selecting the proper namespace. Okay, and I'll show you a very interesting feature that we have to avoid this type of error. Will it work? Deploy. Crash. Then we're like, now reality kicks in, right? Now life as it is. Things are not as easy as they seem to be. Something is different in this file that makes our deployment slightly less straightforward. that doesn't mean it's not easy to fix. And this is why this interface is also very interesting. The using the Git integration is very cool in Portainer. Let me close these. Oh God, I closed the wrong window. Well, I'll open it again soon. Let me close the guest books. I'm gonna open and edit this file straight here in Git. And so first thing is that we want to do this. We want to make sure we use a proper and format for this. So first of all, I know that ports for the version of Docker compose file I want to use, which is 3 and not 2, ports should be like this. So I tweaked the file slightly. I think I fixed everything that I had to fix, and I selected version 3, which is the one I want to use for this advanced deployment. I'm going to commit these changes. Changes have been committed, and all I have to do now is drums rolling, fingers crossed, and click on deploy, and it worked. So okay, so what happened here? Is it straightforward? No, not so. Usually it's not straightforward, and this is a slightly more complex deployment. Let me just pull. I have more stuff here. I have a Postgre database. I also have a Redis caching database. I have from the app 2 working apps. Actually, I have 3 working apps. So I have a worker. I have an app that shows the result. I have the main voting app. So it's a slightly more complex deployment, okay? And those are the ones that we want to really pay attention to. So you see, you want to make sure it's not just, I mean, Portainer obviously makes this transition very easy, but you also want to make sure that in terms of the Docker Compose file you're using the proper standard for the version that you want to use for this deployment. That is, you know, in terms of advanced deployments, you most likely use version 3 of Docker Compose. So you want to make sure this is well sanitized, it's clean, and otherwise it's practically impossible to have a clean deployment or successful deployment. If it works right away, good. But again, as I mentioned, you always want to make sure you test this in Kubernetes. So it's not just a matter of deploying it and going, oh, okay, it deployed, it worked, nice. And I'm going to show a case where Kubernetes differences, different distro Kubernetes types have a huge impact on your deployment. Okay, so we did the nice guest book. Now let's see if this is working. Okay, go to voting. Just voting. And oh, it's got an internal. I think the app is this one. Let's see. Let's go to port mappings. Vote. Yes, it's got a 52. So what happened here? I'm using an internal port. Oh, I want to change that. I want to expose this. How can I do that? Let's see. Go to voting. How could I expose this? Let's see. How did I do this with our guest book? Oops, sorry. Where am I? Oh, YAMLs. How did I do this with my guest book? I'll show you. If you select the proper label, because what we use an engine called Compose with a K. If you use the proper label under the Compose engine for the network type, and I'm going to copy this and try to configure this on my voting engine. Would it work? Probably would. So what I'm going to do here is going to add this label. Oops. Make sure that indent is also correct. Otherwise, this might crash. I'm also going to select load balancer on this deployment because I want to expose this to the internet or to the network. How are you going to do this? Go back. Look how interesting. I can do an advanced deployment again. Select the same namespace. I might have to very soon. This won't be necessary in the next versions of Portainer. There's going to be a little button where we'll just click on redeploy, and there you go. It's going to redeploy your stack. For now, we have to do this manually, but we're working on changing this on the future versions of Portainer. So I'm copying the file I edited in GitHub because I want to make sure it runs with a load balancing capability. And you go, oops, what did I do wrong? Oh, I forgot to select compose here. Sorry. Deploy. So is this gonna duplicate my my deployment? No, it's gonna deploy on the same namespace. It's redeploying the pods, but now I have a load balancer, right? And I'm doing this in my local Kubernetes environment, and I already have. Let's see if it's working. I think it's almost working. Let's see if I click on Axis. There you go. So now, this is what is interesting. And this is why this Git integration is also very interesting. What I did was I edited the file because I'm using Git. I'm going to have the versioning behind it. But I edited the file, and I managed to redeploy using exactly the same interface with Portainer, the same Docker Compose. However, I wanted it to work, and it worked. So again, we don't operate miracles, but we make this transition much easier in a much faster manner to our clients, to our customers, to our enthusiasts that want to migrate from Docker to Kubernetes. I'm actually migrating from on my home lab. I'm migrating slowly my applications from Docker to Kubernetes using this method. I tried doing it manually initially, just for the sake of learning and understanding what I was doing in the back end, which I also think is important. Try to do this manually once, and then do it with Portainer. Why? Because then you understand what are the fundamentals. If I hadn't done this manually in the beginning, I wouldn't have never known that I would have to clean or update or change my Docker Compose file in order for it to work with Portainer. So it's always important to go deep into as much as you can in terms of knowledge, especially when you're using the Docker Compose file, which I think is a great format in order to do this transition nicely using Portainer. Portainer is going to make your life much easier, and it's going to speed things for you. Okay, so as you can see, I changed this file here on GitHub. Let's see if this works now on my DigitalOcean cloud deployment. Same thing. I'm going to go to same. And Fabian, feel free to interject and bring your knowledge in here and keep me truthful, please, anytime.
What would I can't add anything here because it's just working too smoothly, you know.
It's working nicely. Well, good. I'm happy.
Yeah.
Because I have you as a reference of someone that has tons of knowledge on this. So if it's working nicely for you, I'm very, very happy. Okay, same thing. I'm going to go back to my repository, copy, paste. And guys, my personal view of technology has to be something that simplifies your life, right? I know there's a lot of people that like to do things in the hard way, and I admire them, and I think it's a great initiative. It's good for knowledge. It's good to understand what you're doing. But if you have a tool that make things easier for you in a consistent and fail-safe manner, why not, right? Okay, so now here I'm in DigitalOcean doing the same thing, deploying the voting application. It's already been sanitized. It's already been put in a format that I think is that I want that will work. I'm going to deploy this using the namespace voting that I created. Compose, everything is nice and running. Click on deploy. It should work. Manifest successfully deployed. Okay, and it's running okay with the load balancer. And then you go, you know what? I don't want the load balancer. And the reason I don't want the load balancer, because load balancer sometimes is cost. I want to use the node port deployment. Can I change this here? So what this is going to do is going to assign us another IP, and each IP that I have on my deployment is something that DigitalOcean is charging me extra for. You know what? I'm just going to use node port, and I am going to use my Ingress proxy engine node port that I don't need to pay extra for. I'm going to change this to node port. Let's see how this goes. Application, advanced deployment. Excuse me. Same thing. Docker compose. I know this part of having to copy paste is a bit tiring, but believe me, it's much easier than having to write tons of YAML files. A typical MySQL deployment, a very simple MySQL deployment, excuse me, and I'll try to show this here, is at least 3 or 4 YAML files. Okay, it's the image, networking, and at least 2 or 1 big or one storage definition, the PV and the PVC YAML manifest, just for a simple database, right? And here I don't need to do this. Okay, voting. Put successfully. I don't have the load balancer anymore. As you can see, it's got the cluster IP and a cluster port mapping. And what is my cluster port mapping? Let's see, it's 31993. And then you go, oh, but it's not as easy as using load balancer. No, it's not. I agree. You know what I can do is I go to, which node is it on? It's not that hard. It's on node 8032F. I'll show you how. You can do this just by going into your cloud provider. Let's check Kubernetes. There it is. Let's see if I can get the IP of my node. I think is it networking? I think it's here. Okay. Nodes. Just go straight to the node. And it's F, right? Okay. Oh, where's it in networking? Sorry, guys, I never know. It's so much stuff that goes on here. I think it's here. Right, sorry, here it is. So this is the IP, copy, paste the IP, and I know that the port that I was assigned for this is this port. Is it going to work? Let's see. There you go. So there's just another way of, if you don't want to use load balancer, and if you have some sort of proxy, or if just you basically want to expose it as it is, to use this method to expose your applications. The interesting thing here is that once you have, and it's not hard, Docker Compose is a very nice format. And it's very also, the good thing about it is that if well written, you can use it to deploy and to change things from Docker to Kubernetes very easily. And as long as you know the labels that you need to use for, so that the Compose engine can translate them into the Kubernetes YAML file, it's going to work. Sometimes, but you say, oh, it's a lot of work. Yeah, it is a lot of work. It's going to work, but it's much less than trying to redefine from a Docker deployment to a traditional YAML manifest. Believe me, it's a lot simpler. So I really encourage you, to those that want to migrate from Docker to Kubernetes, to learn Docker Compose. One last test. Let's go for the big guns. This is all nice, little applications, nice and beautiful. But now let's do something slightly more real life. Let's get closer to real life. Let's add a stack called GitLab. Yep, let's try GitLab. Once again, my repository is here. Copy, paste, refs, heads, main, and I'm trying to run here because I'm running out of time. Where's okay? GitLab original. Oops. It's gonna work in Docker. I'm sure it is. Declare the stack. Again, the images have already been pulled, so it should. If it's taking slightly longer, it's because it's slightly more complex, but it's already up and running. Here's my GitLab. And let's open the logs because it's already running. Nice. It usually takes some time. Let's go back to containers, and it should be running here. Okay, I'll tell you what. This port is a port that usually is not really doesn't really work in browsers, right? And you go, interesting. What if I want to change this port? Would it be the port? I think it's the port. Let's go and change it to, where is it? 82. Why not? See tons of environment variables. I could have all of these in a file. I just hope I have time to show this also. I'm going to redeploy this. I'm going to go to stats, GitLab, editor. Oh, I could do it here also. Look, I can change it right here if I want. But this is not going to be synced with my Git server, okay? So let's make sure that if you edit this in Portainer, you understand that this is just a local addition of your file. It's not going to be replicated into your Git server. Let's update the stack. Let's see what happens. For some reason, I had in Firefox, this port was a port that Firefox complained. And I think Chrome might have a similar issue with this port. Oh, there you go. So it was a matter of changing the port. Obviously, it's not just a matter of having the Docker. Again, it doesn't. We don't run miracles. Even in Docker, a deployment can be slightly cumbersome, especially when we're talking more of advanced systems. So you want to make sure you know what you're doing, or that you have the proper definitions in place for your applications. GitLab does take some time to spin up. Let's see. Soon enough, we should see a prompt. But this already indicates that it's running. You might believe it's not, but it is. Believe me. Otherwise, we wouldn't even see this message. We would have some sort of gateway error or something like that. So this is a message coming from GitLab, and there you go. So I got GitLab Community Edition running on Docker. Nice. I'm going to go straight to DigitalOcean. No, sorry. Let's run it on Kubernetes. Come on, let's do the proper process. Namespace and namespace. GitLab again. Create the namespace. Go to applications. Advanced deployment. Compose. Same process. Samuel. Okay, hey Samuel. So for those who raise their hands and want to participate, I'm happy to bring you on board. Hold on, guys. Let me put Samuel here. He wants to ask a question. Okay, Samuel, please feel free. Tell us what would you like to know? How can we help you? Can you hear us? I think I can hear you, Samuel. If you want to say something, please feel free. Okay, so again, what I'm doing is the same process in Kubernetes. I'm going to try to deploy this. Crash, bang, boom. Okay, we have a problem. What is the problem? Let's open the file. Right off the top, you see, I mean, the ports are well defined. Everything seems nice. Version, maybe? What if we change this version? Let's put version 3. Will it work? Let's commit the changes. Let's try this again. Okay, there you go. So once more, it's a matter of understanding what's going on, what you need. If it's the proper definition, each application obviously has its own challenge GitLab, although it only has two, let's say, applications running behind it, which is GitLab and Postgre. It's slightly more complex than any of the other ones I just showed. So you know what? I wanted to run, but now I'm just going to go straight to DigitalOcean and try to do the same thing. And again, I can change it to load balancer. I just have to make sure I put the proper label, namespace, GitLab, source assignment, namespace, applications, deployment. I want it to run, what's that definition again that I put on voting? Let's label right, copy it. I want to do the same thing for my GitLab deployment. I want to make sure that GitLab also has this label here. Oops, let's make sure indenting is working. You know what? I want balance. Right. This is changes. Okay, so compose, same thing again. Once you get the grasp of this, it's again, it's repetition, but it's good repetition. It's much better than any other option, in my opinion. File name. Deploy. It's going to work. Manifest successfully deployed. Let's go back before we get to the DigitalOcean deployment. I'm going to go to my local Kubernetes deployment and see if GitLab worked, because it takes some time, right? Let's go to applications. I'm going to isolate namespace. I know my cluster port. Let's see if it's this one. I know the IP of my Kubernetes machine is 10.1.100. Oh no, sorry. It's Portainer.e. It's gonna work. Let's see. There you go. It's working. So it worked. This is my Kubernetes endpoint, my local Kubernetes endpoint. This is my Docker endpoint. So both worked. Will it work on DigitalOcean? We're all here drumming, and I hope you're all rooting for yes. But the real answer is no, it didn't work on DigitalOcean. And the reason why is that I'm still trying to find out the reason why it didn't work on DigitalOcean. But the point here is not that Portainer didn't work, is that, again, not every Kubernetes distro is the same as the other. They should all, in theory, share the same API, which they usually do. But there are some differences between their Kubernetes distros that you have to make sure you know and understand in order to tweak that into your Docker Compose file or your Kubernetes YAML manifest, right? So this is a very important tip that I give to everyone that is trying to do this transition. Before you do anything, make sure you understand everything that is required on the final, let's say, destination of your deployment. In this case, if we were to be DigitalOcean, why it's not working. It's going to stay here in this eternal loop. And I'm sure it's something that has to do with the Kubernetes deployment in itself. And sorry guys, I wish I had the answer. Maybe on my next episode, I'll explain quickly what went wrong, but or ask Fabian, our master, to help me with this whenever he has some time, obviously later after this episode. But the thing is, the point is here very important. This error is intentional to show you that their interface helps you. The manifest was accepted, but now we're talking about Kubernetes per se. So you have to make sure you understand exactly what is going to happen at the endpoint so you can do this deployment successfully. Now, again, believe me, all you have to do now is tweak the Docker Compose file. Or you can check the YAML file that Portainer generates and understand here, maybe you could tweak it so it works for you also. So it's much easier than having to go through the entire nightmare of trying to write from scratch YAML manifest or using any other tool, which honestly for me, I still haven't seen in the market something that can give you this type of, let's say, detail and easiness in terms of transitioning from one to the other. So with that, I would like to open for questions. I'm going to stop sharing now. And and again, I reinforce what you've just said, and I hope I also managed to convey this here in this episode. Portainer is a tool that's going to facilitate the process, but you have to understand what you're doing. You really have to make sure you understand this Docker Compose file truly. It's not just copy paste. It's not just download. It's not just, oh, click and click. What Portainer does here is it ensures that you have a consistent interface, an easy way of using this interface for your migration. But that doesn't exclude you from having to understand exactly what you're doing. And as Fabian mentioned, GitLab, for instance, is a beast. It's running on my local Kubernetes environment, but it's not running on my cloud environment. Because it's a complex application, it's extremely complex to deploy. So make sure that you guys know what you're doing before you're doing this. But again, I can assure you, without Portainer, it's probably going to be slightly harder. And I think Fabian can agree with me.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
definitely going to be slightly harder to do because you get to a point where you go absolutely crazy.
It says, are there any consideration or tips for deploying with persistent storage? Maybe a bit of a new question.
I would say that again, that is part of understanding your deployment, right? In terms of understanding what the Docker Compose has as a definition, and what also you can include in terms of your definition. If you're talking about migration, okay, how you could include that by using the compose labels, so that when it comes to translating this using the compose engine into Kubernetes, that it's done properly, right? Now, if you're asking in terms of technologies, oh, there are tons. There are tons of technologies, but one I personally like a lot that I think is very interesting in terms of storage, persistent storage technology for Kubernetes is OpenEBS. I don't know if Fabian and I have experience with it, but I so far have been using it a lot, and I'm loving it because it gives me a start of a high availability of my information in terms of persistence. So because it replicates everything in at least 3 nodes on its basic configuration. So you can ensure that you know if one node dies, you have another node that will still have the same data there persistent with you running in a container. So you might want to check from a persistent storage perspective for technology for Kubernetes, OpenEBS. Fabian, I don't know if you have any additional tips.
I just wanted to add that probably the compose part of this, the compose with a K, simply translates any volume to the default storage class that's installed in Kubernetes. So by using a cloud Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes, you should typically have a storage class in its Minikube kind and all of the likes. They also have that. That should actually not be an issue unless you set up something manually and forget to set up a storage class. What I'm not sure about is if you have some agency over the correct storage class. I assume that works with labels in Compose then.
Yes, so, yes, it also does. It also does.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I can add another tool in terms of storage in Kubernetes. We are using Longhorn from Rancher.
Oh, Longhorn,
which does pretty much something along the lines of OpenEBS. Open iSCSI multi hyper converged foo, and also very good performance on low end hardware. We're using this typically on Hetzner nodes on the €5 nodes, and it's super. It's super amazing.
Yeah, you know, it's something I've noticed from these technologies that use containers as a storage, let's say, device, is that the performance is interesting. It does give you an enhancement in performance. I could bring you up an OpenEBS storage to a pod is not necessarily that fast, depending obviously on the technology they're using. But once you start using it, I mean, you see an increase in performance in your application when you use Longhorn or when you use OpenEBS or similar technologies. So you might want to take a look at that, Casper. It's thank you, Fabian, for your tip. That's also a very good tip.
Yeah, that
no,
just so
shadows
you
are not
guys
from a drum.
know. Sorry,
Not
go
sure.
ahead, Fabian.
No, I just wanted to answer the question. No, the shadows are not from a drum. It's from some kind of flower in the window.
It does look like a drum set. It does.
Okay, yeah. You know the
Oh, that's
toms?
funny.
Okay, I can
Very
see.
cool. Okay, guys. So we're almost we're past 5 minutes of our hour into this PortaiNerd series. I hope this met your expectations in terms of what we can do for migrating Docker to Kubernetes. Again, feel free to schedule a meeting with me if you would like to. Fabian, thank you so much for participating and giving your valuable and amazing input. Michael, once again, thank you so much for your support here and giving all your amazing answers and to all the audience. I would kindly also ask you to please fill in the survey that is right after this episode. Once I close the session, please. This is very important for us to make sure we're in the right path. We're doing things nicely and properly for you guys. This is for our community. And once again, thank you. You guys all have a great week. Thank you very much. Bye, Fabian. Bye, Michael. Bye, everyone.